Okay, recently finally finished this 10 by 12 greenhouse from HarborFreight. I bought this back in December, just before Christmas. Found that you can get a good deal at HarborFreight when they have a holiday coming up, a big holiday. They usually have a 25% off coupon. So I was able to get this thing for just over $500. I did a lot of research online and looked at all the recommendations that people had for making modifications and improvements for the greenhouse. I did take several of those into consideration and incorporated them into my greenhouse. I did do the sealing of the edges with the foil, duct foil that they use in heating and air conditioning. I just cut widths of foil and hit the dimension of the width of each panel, and then I took an X-Acto knife and a straight edge and just cut the tape into small strips and applied them at both edges. There's been some commentaries about whether or not to do the bottom edges. I did both edges and see how that holds up. I also incorporated the screws going through the panel to help them from popping off in high wind. I used a screw, the hex screw with a rubber grommet on it, and I screwed those through the panels into the crossbars. I'll show those to you in a minute. And I also used a little spacer between the bar that they screwed into and the actual panel. That way it didn't really cause a big flex into the panel. The biggest difference I made with mine, I discarded the metal base. I was kind of looking for people that may have done this previously, but I did not see anywhere, so I went ahead and kind of laid out 4x4s and determined what the correct dimensions were and used that as my base. I did have a little bit of a grade to take into consideration as well, so I had to buy additional 4x4s. These are all 12-foot 4x4s, and I did cut them down to the correct size. I'll give you the dimensions on that. Here's how the base looks around the perimeter. And you can see where I screwed in the panels. Here's a good view of how there's a picture of the screw, and there's like a little spacer that I cut between the spacer, the actual bar that they screw into the back. You can kind of see that in there as well. All I did was I bought a 4-foot piece of PEX tubing and just took some cutters and clipped them around. And I'll show you those here. Actually, I put this thing put it up by myself, so it is possible to put it up by yourself. You just have to have a couple of tall ladders. I had a 6-foot and an 8-foot. You definitely need to have an 8-foot ladder to do this. Here's the little pieces of PEX tubing I used, and a little cutter I bought from Lowe's. Definitely worth buying one of those. These are the screws and washers I used. Just they're self-tapping, so there's very easy to put them in. And the way I anchored the bottom of the greenhouse to the base, I had to take those little clips that they have that clipped underneath the lip of their metal base. I straightened them out in a vise, and I just then drilled a hole in them and screwed them down with lag screws. Here's what they look like. The only testy ones were ones in the corner. You had to kind of overlap them, and that's how that worked. Otherwise, they're real easy. This thing is rock solid. I think that's one of the biggest improvements that I made to this compared to what other people have been doing. Other people have been taking conduit and running them crosswise or lengthwise or across the corners, and I found that I don't think that is necessary with the type of base I have, because the base is very, very rigid, much more rigid than the metal one that they have, because it basically put that metal base down. You're supposed to put gravel up inside it, and that's supposed to hold it. I think these do a much better job, and like I said, it's just very rigid. This is the dimensions for the base. That's the exterior dimensions. Like I said, I use 4x4s. It's 118.5 by 142 inches. If you make those, I think the I'm not sure. I think the diagonals, when you read to make sure it's square, I think it was 185 inches, but I can't be sure of that. You just want to make sure it's square first before you start setting them up. The only thing I'm going to do is with these corners, the wood is exposed on the corners. I think what I'll do is I'll probably put some kind of caulking or something, or maybe a little piece of aluminum there, because water will run down there and, you know, probably cause a little decay on those things. But otherwise, the rest of the edge just hangs just over the edge of the wood, and I think that's going to be a great improvement if you want to take that into consideration. I mean, it'll cost you a little more, but I think you'll have a much sturdier greenhouse. Hope this helps. Thanks. Bye.